Merry Christmas and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host, and Christmas is what we're celebrating, but it's also our topic for 2 hours today. Jimmy Akin, senior apologist here at Catholic Answers, is our guest. Jimmy, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Cy Kellett. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Thank you very, very much. It feels funny because, of course, we pre-record for this week.
Proleptic holiday greetings.
Right. But so if anything has happened that we are not aware of, and they're like, how can they be doing that show and not be mentioning this or that? Well, because we're recording it early.
It's wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. But I'm happy to get to say Merry Christmas to you. Mm-hmm. And
because we won't be here actual Christmas week, so we wouldn't get to say it then.
No, I wish I could. I was going to say I'll be on the beach somewhere. Like, that's a total lie. There's no beach I could go to.
But it would be
freeze it out.
Like raining here in San Diego. It's raining now, in fact.
Yeah. All right. So it's all Christmas questions.
Okay.
And you solicited these Christmas questions. You said to the internets, ask anything you want about Christmas, and the internets responded.
Yep.
All right. Oh, by the way, since we are unstuck in time. Usually I ask you, what's on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World this week? But now it will be the week after Christmas. Do you know the answer to that?
Oh, yeah, sure.
All right.
I've got Mysterious World mapped out through like March.
And it's in your head. Like,
well,
I'm sure you have a what do they call those things? A spreadsheet somewhere.
Yeah, I do. But so since this Friday is New Year's Eve, we're going to be doing, or is New Year's, we're going to be doing a New Year's edition of Weird Questions.
Oh, good. Okay.
And we just did a Christmas edition last Friday of Christmas Weird Questions. So they were weird, but also Christmas.
Okay.
So people can check that out. And then the first Friday in January, we are doing an episode on called "It's Always Demons?" in which we look at criteria for whether demons are actually involved in a situation or not, because people leap to that conclusion a little quicker than they should.
Now, and I'm not sure if I'm supposed to say this, but I don't know what I'm supposed to say about this, but Dr. Ray was in town, and you recorded a show with Dr. Ray for his TV show.
Correct.
And that's kind of what you talked about, wasn't it?
Yeah, we talked about, it's Dr. Ray, so there were some hijinks involved.
Of course there were.
A little bit of shenanigans.
I'd be scared to be on his show, actually, now that I think about it.
Really?
Yeah, well, I mean, you never know exactly what's going to happen. So he hijinxed you, huh?
Well, he hijinxed the audience with me as his confederate.
Oh, okay.
So, but you can watch the show and see what happens.
Okay, good.
But we then talked about demons and mental illness.
Yeah.
And how to distinguish the two, and took questions from the audience.
It was so nice that when he was out here, he's a very, very nice man.
Oh, yeah, he's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and a lot of fun. That's exactly right. All right, you ready to do some Christmas questions?
I'm ready.
All right, we start from Dan. Dan says, if the Bible describes the Star of Bethlehem as a star, why does everyone insist on proving it was something else, a comet, the confluence of Jupiter and Venus, etc.?
So the New Testament does use the Greek word for star, but there's been a shift between the first century and now in terms of how we conceptualize stars. Today, we think of stars as very distant bodies that glow under their own light, which is caused by nuclear fusion, they're burning hydrogen and helium and so forth, and fusing these elements together to produce heavier elements, and that's what we think of as a star, is this supermassive, very distant, glowing body of fusing gas. And that's not how the ancients thought about stars, because they didn't have those concepts. Number one, they didn't realize the universe is nearly as big as it is.
Yeah.
So they didn't realize the stars were distant. They also, consequently, since they didn't realize they were distant, they didn't realize how big they are. They thought they were much smaller. And they didn't know at all about nuclear fusion. And so they didn't have a way to distinguish stars that burn by their own light from other heavenly bodies that reflect light. And so to the ancients, a star was simply anything in the sky at night that was light.
Yeah,
so
so
any light in the sky is a star.
So the meaning of the word is what the evangelist would have meant by it.
Correct.
Right. So he would have meant just any old light that's up there.
Correct.
That's a star. Okay.
And then the ancients had various categories for different types of stars that they could recognize based on their appearance or behavior. And in fact, the moon was a star.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, technically, it was a specific kind of star called a planetes asteres. Planetes is Greek for wandering, and then asteres is star. So so you had two basic kinds of stars. The first kind of star were the fixed stars that stay in the same position in the sky relative to other stars, like what you see in a constellation like the Big Dipper.
Right.
Now, technically, those stars move around, but it's so slow it doesn't happen on human time scale. So they look fixed in position. They may rotate around the heavenly pole, but with respect to each other, they stay in one position, which is why the Big Dipper doesn't change shape. It just moves in the sky.
Right.
But then there were everything else, and everything else wandered against the background. And so these wandering stars, that's what planetes means, is wanderer. So anything that wandered against the background of the fixed stars was a planet. And that included the moon, because it's a light source in the sky that wanders against the background of fixed stars. The sun, because the sun also moves around the background of fixed stars. It passes through the signs of the zodiac every year. What we think of as planets, like Mercury and Jupiter and Saturn and so forth, and then also comets. Comets were called long-haired stars, or cometes asteres, because of the tails they have. So all of these were considered stars, and that means when you're trying to interpret Matthew and say, well, what kind of star would have brought the Magi to Jerusalem? Well, it's probably not a fixed star, because fixed stars rise every year.
Yes.
Every single year they come up and they do their thing, and it's because they're fixed. They behave in regular, repeatable ways that are always the same. So so when a star rises, there's a special kind of rising known as a heliacal rising, where a star for the first time in the year peeks its little head up over the eastern horizon briefly in conjunction with the sun. Well, that happens every year, and it doesn't mean a new king of the Jews is born every year.
Right.
So it's probably not any of the fixed stars, and that means you would want to look to other things like what we would call planets or what we would call comets to explain what the Star of Bethlehem would have been. And as we may discuss later today, the best evidence we've got, based on my research, is that it was probably Jupiter, the king star, doing something that was significant in the Magi's system of astrology to communicate a king was being born in Judea.
So they were just reading the signs according to their astrology.
Yes.
And they said, there's a new king in Judea. I got you. Let's see. That was Dan. Dan, thank you very, very much for getting us started. Well, we're already upon the first break. It's all Christmas questions today for Jimmy Akin, our senior apologist. Right back with more Christmas after this on Catholic Answers Live.
Catholic Answers Live.
Do you have a question but prefer to ask it privately? Catholic Questions can help. Go to CatholicQuestions.com to ask your question online, email us, drop us a letter, or give us a call. Longtime Catholic Answers Live apologist and author Jim Blackburn or another Catholic Questions apologist will be happy to assist you. Catholic Questions proudly supports Catholic Answers Live, so visit us at CatholicQuestions.com today. That's CatholicQuestions.com.
Saints are the heroes of the Catholic faith. They serve as examples for all Catholics, showing us how to lead a more satisfying, more spiritual life in communion with our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. View our comprehensive documentation of saints who serve as theologians and doctors of the Church. It's easy. Visit EWTN.com and click Catholicism. EWTN, the Global Catholic Network.
Christmas. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Kind of a Christmas internet open forum today. Christmas questions from all over the internet for Jimmy Akin, our senior apologist here at Catholic Answers and the proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. And the next one comes from Francis. Francis asks this: did the wise men arrive 1.5 to 2 years after Christ's birth? If that's the case, where is it they were living? What town? What conditions, etc.?
So they did arrive between 1 and 2 years after Christ's birth, and I know we have some more questions coming up on that, so we can discuss that further. But it's closer to a year is what the evidence seems to support. But between 1 and 2 years, and in terms of where is it they were living, I'm not sure if we're referring here to the Holy Family or the Magi. If it's the Holy Family, well, they could have remained in Bethlehem, or they could have gone back to Nazareth for a while and come back to Bethlehem. But those would seem to be where the Holy Family was living. If we mean the Magi, it's not clear. We know they came from the east, but there were multiple different cultures to the east of Judea. There have been proposals that the Magi were Babylonian, or that they were Jews living in Babylon, although that seems to not be the case, or that they were Persian, or that they were Nabatean. And there have been different arguments about that. We know they were from some Eastern group of people, but we don't know for sure which one. If you'd like more information, you can check out episode 75 of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, which is devoted to the mysteries of the Magi and what we can figure out about them.
All right. Francis, thank you very, very much. More to come, I gather, on the Magi as we go through the program today. All Christmas questions during this 8 days of Christmas here special show with Jimmy Akin. Another Dan asks this: when Mary went to see Elizabeth, was it in a caravan, or is she supposed to have traveled alone through that dangerous country?
So the age of Mary at this time is unclear. We're not definitely told in Scripture. There is a document from the 2nd century known as the Infancy Gospel of James. It's also called the Proto-Evangelium of James, but Proto-Evangelium is such an intimidating word that scholars these days are more commonly calling it the Infancy Gospel of James. And it says that when Jesus was born, Mary was 16. So she would have been 15, perhaps, when the Annunciation happened and when she went down to visit Elizabeth. And it is extremely unlikely that a teenage girl would have been allowed to travel the approximately 100 miles between Nazareth and the Judean hill country alone.
Right.
It is very, very unlikely that would have been allowed to happen. Now, it could have been she went as part of a caravan, because there were these annual pilgrimages, and apparently people from Nazareth would travel down as a group for protection against bandits and other criminals. And she could have come down as part of like a large village caravan, maybe for one of the feasts, and then she stayed over until the next feast. We're told she was there for about 3 months, and then went back after the next feast. I'd have to do some thinking about that and see how that maps onto the Jewish liturgical calendar. But if it wasn't part of a village caravan, it at least would have been like a group of family members or someone that the family knew and trusted that went down, because you typically did not travel long distances alone. It was simply too dangerous at the time.
All right, Dan, thank you very, very much for that question. We continue with our internet Christmas open forum. Suzanne asks this: the lifelong question in our house as the kids were growing up was how Santa could squeeze down that skinny opening in the chimney to put the gifts under the tree and fill the stockings. Our son would sometimes stare up the chimney and have a puzzled look on his face.
So, there's no single answer to this, but there are a number of possibilities for how this could happen. One is, so there's an X-Files pair of episodes about a guy who has the ability to like dislocate his own body parts and stretch, kind of like Mr. Fantastic in the Fantastic Four.
Why does that gross me out?
So hypothetically, Santa could, like take his arm out of his socket and make himself really thin and stretch his way down. That wouldn't explain the way in which he gets the gifts down, though.
Right.
And so normally you don't have Santa Claus conceived of as a kind of human octopus.
No, that's
because octopuses can fit themselves through very small spaces. Because among other things, because it doesn't explain the gifts. How do bigger gifts get through narrow openings? And so there are other ideas that have been proposed. Now, in movies like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, you see a kind of shrinking ability that could apply both to you and to objects you're carrying, like a big sack of presents. So shrinking is a possibility. And shrinking could work in more than one way. One way it could work would be by decreasing the distance between the atoms and the subatomic particles connecting them in your body. Because as we know, matter is mostly empty space. And so hypothetically, you could find a way to do that, but to shrink the distance between them. But if you're doing that on a particle-by-particle basis, that seems very laborious and energy intensive. Right. So I would tend to think for this to happen, you would expect something more like bending space-time. Because if you take a chunk of space and compress it, that's like kind of does it all for you, much in kind of one step, as opposed to trying to do
atom by atom.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I would suspect that this would be accomplished through some kind of spatial compression.
That you went a totally different direction than I was expecting on that question.
Really?
You went quite technical. No mention of PIM particles.
Well, see, that's one version of the atom by atom, moving.
Suzanne, thanks very, very much for the question. It's Christmas open forum with Jimmy Akin. Let's go to Mark. Mark's question. Is Mary also descended from David? If so, she would be tribe of Judah. And even if not, she probably would still be Judah, as they were supposed to marry within their tribe. How then do we explain her kinship with Elizabeth, who was from the tribe of Levi?
So we are told at the beginning of Luke that Elizabeth is one of the daughters of Aaron. So Elizabeth was definitely of the tribe of Levi, and in fact from the most prestigious line of the tribe of Levi. However, it isn't the case that people were expected to marry within their own tribe. Priests were expected to marry fellow Israelites. So Zechariah did when he married Elizabeth, but priests did not have to marry Levite women. It was okay to marry other Israelites.
Okay,
and for ordinary people, you similarly did not have a requirement to marry within your own tribe. And so one way, if Mary is of the tribe of Judah, one way that can happen is if, I should say, I want to make sure I'm answering the exact question we have here. Is Mary also descended from David? Well, we're not told in the clearest way possible, because the two genealogies that we have, one in Matthew and one in Luke, despite what you may have heard, neither of them is Mary's. They are both explicitly Joseph's.
And you do often hear people will resolve what they perceive as a problem, which is not a problem,
correct,
by saying one of these is Mary's and one of them is Joseph's.
And that is contradicted by the text. They are both Joseph's genealogies, and they simply track Jesus' descent from David through more than one line, because you can be descended from a single historical figure in multiple ways. And there can be reasons for tracking those different lines. But that shows us that Joseph is a member of the tribe of Judah. It does not show us that Mary is a member of the tribe of Judah. Is there anything else in Scripture that could point in that direction? Well, there is a passage in Romans. If you look in Romans 3, it says that Jesus was descended from David according to the flesh. So that could indicate, if you take flesh literally, that could indicate biological descent. And since Jesus only got his biology from Mary on the human level, that would mean that Mary would have to be a descendant of David in order for Jesus to be descended from David according to the flesh. The problem is that flesh is not always to be taken in that kind of literal way in Paul. Paul often talks about flesh and means something just like human nature.
Right.
You know, he'll talk about fallen human nature and sins that come from fallen human nature as sins of the flesh or things like that. And so he could just mean that humanly, Jesus was descended from David.
Right.
And if that's all he means, well, in what human ways could he descend from David? Well, biological is certainly one way you can be descended from someone, but you can also be legally descended from them.
Sure.
And so it would be sufficient if Joseph is an heir of David for him to pass on the royal lineage legally. Yeah. So I don't think Romans 1:3 tells us for sure that Mary was biologically descended from David. Having said that, it's quite possible that she was, in which case we would understand one of her ancestors was of the tribe of Judah and the family of David, and another of her ancestors was of the tribe of Levi and the children of Aaron, which would explain how she's related to Elizabeth.
And a lot of times people will say Elizabeth is her cousin, but that's not.
That is not. Yeah, no. There's a different word in Greek for cousin than what is used here. The word that's used here is songenes, and it just means kinswoman.
Yeah.
Anepsia would be the word for cousin, and it is not used in this passage. So all we can say from Luke is that Elizabeth is Mary's kinswoman. The idea that she should be described, and in fact the current New American Bible uses kinswoman rather than cousin. The idea that Mary and Elizabeth were cousins was actually popularized by John Wycliffe back in the 1400s. He was the one that introduced that characterization into English. And it wasn't as restrictive as we would understand it today.
Right.
Today, when we talk about someone being a cousin, we almost invariably imagine first cousin.
Right,
you know, someone who's like the daughter of your aunt or son or daughter of your aunt or uncle.
Right.
But actually there are loads of different types of cousins that are more distantly related. And in Wycliffe's day, the term cousin wasn't narrowed to mean just first cousin. And so it could have been reasonable at that time, given that people were more aware of the more distantly related cousins, and it was functionally equivalent to kinswoman.
Thanks, Mark, again for the question. It's Christmas Internet Open Forum for Jimmy Akin today. And Robert asks this: is it too cold in December for shepherds to be out tending sheep in Bethlehem?
Okay, so you know those trendy jackets that started being real popular a few years ago, those fleece jackets?
Yes.
You know what those fleece jackets are made of? Fleece, yeah. And you know what?
Sure, I thought that might be a trick question.
Yeah. And they keep people warm, right? That's why they're so trendy.
Right, yes.
Well, you know where you find fleece?
Macy's.
You know where Macy's gets the fleece from ultimately?
I'm going to guess Bethlehem. No, all right, from sheep's.
From sheep, yeah. Yes. So sheep are covered in that stuff. They just like grows out of them. And so
they're wearing a fleece coat.
They're wearing a fleece coat, and usually a much thicker one than humans are. So sheep are designed to be outdoors in the winter. They evolved that way. And so, no, it is not too cold for the sheep to be outside. And the question is it too cold in December in Judea for humans to be outside? Well, not if they're wearing a fleece jacket.
Which they probably had access to because they have sheep.
Because they had sheep, yeah. So they had winter wear clothing they could wear. And even today, the shepherds actually tend their sheep in Bethlehem in late December. There's a famous in biblical circles. There's a famous letter from the 1960s where one biblical scholar was visiting Bethlehem on Christmas and noted that at Shepherd's Field, the shepherds were actually out with the sheep, and even the baby lambs were there.
Yeah.
So this is totally normal. In fact, if you look up winter sheep care online, it points out you do not need to bring them in during the cold. They can get snow on them, and they're just fine. So no, it is not too cold for this to be happening in December. Now, that doesn't mean that it did happen in December. It just means this is not an argument.
Yeah, yeah. Jimmy Akin is our guest. We've covered how to shrink your atoms and change the curvature of space-time to get down a chimney and all kinds of other stuff. And a lot more Christmas questions to come. Hang on. More Christmas Internet Open Forum with Jimmy Akin right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
Here's a question. Is it really possible to be friends with someone who died 2,000 years ago? Maybe the problem is that we've grown way too comfortable with the story of Jesus. Nice man, right? Taught us to love one another, said not to judge people. We celebrate his birthday every year. It's time to put away this small, safe version of Jesus, says Cy Kellett. Nobody that bland could have transformed the world. In A Teacher of Strange Things, Cy presents Jesus Christ undiluted by sentiment, with all his radical words and deeds uncensored. Do you know someone, your son or daughter perhaps, or maybe your mom or dad, who needs the friendship of Jesus Christ? Do you? Order your copy of A Teacher of Strange Things by visiting shop.catholic.com today or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you. Have you enrolled in the Catholic Answers School of Apologetics? Let me ask you a more important question. Do you believe as a Catholic that you have an obligation to share the Catholic faith? In fact, the Church has answered this question, and the answer is that all confirmed Catholics are obliged to share the faith. It's actually in canon law. Catholic Answers is here to help you fulfill that obligation. Our School of Apologetics courses will equip you to help all the people you come in contact with understand what the Church teaches and why. A great place to start is with all the Catholics in your life. Learn the art of apologetics from the best of the best and start sharing the gospel today. Visit schoolofapologetics.com. That's schoolofapologetics.com.
Did you know you can access Catholic Answers Live right from your phone or other mobile device? Download the Catholic Answers Live app today. The Catholic Answers Live app, available now on iOS and Android.
This is Debbie Georgiani.
And I'm Jerry Usher.
Join us for Take Two with Jerry and Debbie tomorrow at noon Eastern.
Now back to Catholic Answers Live.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. It's an Internet Open Forum of the Christmas variety today. All Christmas questions for Jimmy Akin, and the Internet has a lot of Christmas questions and a great variety of Christmas questions. So now we have a question from a priest, Father Matthew. We all know the math, that Santa would need to travel so fast he would disintegrate. But that's to deliver the presents on Christmas Eve. But if Santa were to somehow survive, would that be a valid miracle in a cause for canonization? St. Nicholas was canonized before the formal process, so if it works, it could theoretically be for his cause.
So the standards and the role of miracles in canonizations has changed over time. Back in the day, there was more stress put on did miracles occur during a saint's lifetime. These days, the focus is more on have miracles happened after the saint's death through their intercession, because if God is granting miraculous prayer requests through the intercession of a particular saint, that's evidence the saint is in heaven. And while miracles that occur during a saint's life could contribute to a case, it's really the post-mortem miracles that would be more decisive. And in the case of Santa Claus, well, the problem, so we have St. Nicholas, who was canonized by acclaim before before the Pope became the one to do all this stuff, to do all the evaluations. But if Santa Claus is still flying around and is not being killed by the excessive speeds causing him to disintegrate, he's still alive. He's not in heaven.
So that's not St. Nicholas.
So, well, it wouldn't be the same one anyway.
Yes, right.
And he thus would not be eligible for canonization because canon law requires that a certain amount of time pass after your death before a cause for canonization can be opened. And if he's not dead, then the canonization process cannot start.
All right. I feel like, though, if he could travel, wouldn't he travel at just like almost, you have to be at the speed of light to get to everywhere?
Not the speed of light, but very close to it. You can also pick up some extra time if you fly west against the rotation of the Earth.
Oh, right, because so you're just going to add how many hours? 12 hours or 24 hours to the day?
You're going to add. It depends. There's a little bit of math to do, but you basically can extend it if you are moving against the direction of the Earth rather than with it.
But I feel like if you can move that fast, then you've probably solved the disintegration problem. I mean,
well, yeah,
it's. Technically, these would be
and it wouldn't have to, just like earlier, it could be a spatial compression thing. It could be that in this case, there is a warp bubble around Santa as he travels this fast, and that would protect him from the effects of the massive acceleration and deceleration.
That's what I thought.
In which case, it wouldn't be a miracle at all.
No, it would just be a warp bubble.
Yeah,
which is not miraculous at all. The next one comes from Ryan. If Jesus was born on December 25th. How is it the Eastern Orthodox and Eastern Catholics, I think is what that means, celebrate Christmas on the Feast of the Epiphany if it commemorates the arrival of the three wise men 12 days after Jesus was born? There's a lot of ifs in that question.
Yeah, so there are some Eastern Christians, principally Armenians, who celebrate Christmas on January 6th. And in the West, January 6th is often celebrated as the arrival of the wise men or the Epiphany, the manifestation of Christ to the nations. That's what Epiphany means in Greek, is manifestation. And so the reason that you have these different interpretations of January 6th is that January 6th was originally proposed as Jesus' birthday. The early church fathers do not agree on when Jesus was born. There are a variety of different dates that they've been proposed, that they proposed. December 25th is one of them. So is January 6th. And actually, January 6th seems to be a little bit of an older tradition, although even then it's not the oldest. So you had in the early church some Christians celebrating Jesus's birthday on January 6th, and some on December 25th, and some on other dates, and some not celebrating it at all. Well, over the course of time, December 25th and January 6th became the two more common ones, and they both ended up being celebrated in the West in one way or another. The West ultimately decided to celebrate Jesus' birthday on December 25th, but there was still this other tradition of celebrating it on January 6th. And so the question was, well, do we want to do it twice, or maybe we should just give a little bit of a different interpretation to January 6th, and we can keep celebrating it for traditional reasons, but we're going to understand it a little differently. And so that's how January 6th became associated with the arrival of the wise men, which was obviously an event connected with Jesus' birth, even though it was 2 years later instead of 2 weeks later.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So that's how we got the January 6th thing. But there are some Christians in the East who celebrate January 6th, and I know the Armenians tend to do this, but not most. Most Eastern Orthodox and some Eastern Catholics celebrate Jesus' birthday on December 25th.
Oh.
On the Julian calendar.
Oh.
Which is different than the Gregorian calendar.
It was replaced,
Yeah. So the Julian calendar was the one that was developed initially under it had roots earlier than this, but under Julius Caesar. And it was used for many centuries by the church, but it doesn't exactly align with the solar year. And so as a result, the Julian calendar was getting out of sync by the Middle Ages. It was getting noticeably out of sync with the seasons. And that's why Pope Gregory in the 1500s commissioned a new calendar, which is known as the Gregorian calendar, which is used civilly all over the world today.
Yeah.
But not all churches use it as their liturgical calendar. In the East, because religion is very traditional, in the East, various Christians still use the Julian calendar for liturgical purposes. And so they will be celebrating Christ's birthday on December 25th on the Julian calendar, which corresponds to January 7th on the Gregorian calendar.
How interesting.
At the moment, although over centuries that'll change.
It'll change, right.
Some, I gather, celebrate both the Gregorian December 25th and the Julian December 25th. And so they actually do Christmas twice a year.
Good for them. That's the way to do that. My understanding, and I don't have a direct understanding of this, I just remember being told this as a child, that in Mexico, the tradition was always Christmas on the 25th, but the presents on the 6th. So they just, it was more of...
Presents are even more variable because that's a local culture tradition. They don't...
So Epiphany was the day you got I guess associated with the presents that the baby Jesus got.
And there also were traditions of giving presents earlier in December on St. Nicholas Day.
Yes, but are there more questions about the dating of Christmas to come?
Somewhere in there. I don't know whether we'll get to all of them today, but
all right, I'm going to move on then. All right. What are the historical reasons? I'm sorry, Carolyn. I didn't say your name. Carolyn's question is, what are the historical reasons for the celebration of the Immaculate Conception in December?
Well, this one's pretty simple. It started to be celebrated in December in the eastern part of the Christian world back in the 7th century. And gradually it spread all over the Christian world, including in the West, and that's how it ended up on the liturgical calendar in the Latin Rite for December.
Well, that was very easy. Carolyn, thank you very much for that question. Perfect time to take a break. We'll do that right now. We'll take a quick break. Be right back with more Internet Christmas Open Forum with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
There's only one Catholic Answers Live.
Do you love praying for people? Have you ever wanted to use your gift of prayer to share Jesus with others and build up the body of Christ? Start a public prayer station with St. Paul Street Evangelization. Listen to people's needs, pray with them, or invite them to meet you at church. St. Paul Street Evangelization can help you get started. Find out how at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Hi friends, Janet Williams here. Join me every Wednesday on Women of Grace Live as I welcome New Age researcher and blogger for Women of Grace, Sue Brinkman. Sue and I will be talking about all the wacky things that could distract you from your faith. Psychics, yoga, Reiki, crystals, acupuncture, Ouija boards, tarot cards, and astral traveling are just a few of the stranger things we discuss. That's why we call it Wacky Wednesday. So join us tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. It's a Internet Open Forum. Christmas questions today. Merry Christmas. We're still in the octave of Christmas, as we Catholics say, the 8-day celebration of the Feast of Christmas, and in the Christmas season and in the Christmas mood as well. Happy to be here with you. Jimmy Akin is our guest. Hello again, Jimmy.
Hello, Psychelic.
Jimmy, of course, proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, and there's going to be some weird questions this week on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World.
Yeah.
Coming up on Friday of this week.
for New Year's.
And
although they're not specifically New Year's related questions.
Okay. All right. Mary Ann, I've been wanting to get to your question. I'm anxious to hear Jimmy's answers to these two questions that Mary Ann poses. What does Jimmy eat for Christmas dinner? And what is your all-time favorite Christmas movie?
So in regard to the first question, so I'm a widower, so I live alone, and I'm alone on Christmas Eve, and so I don't make a big deal out of cooking. Okay. Instead, I'll order out. And in recent years, I have been ordering, I mean, I definitely did this last year, and I'm planning on doing it again this year, which now will have been in the past. Yeah. But I ordered Himalayan food.
Really?
Yeah. So this is the kind of food. There are a number of local Himalayan restaurants. I mean, there are many, many restaurants of different nationalities in San Diego.
Yeah.
And there are a number of Himalayan ones. So this is the kind of food you would find in Nepal and India and places in that part of the world. And it can be very tasty. It can be spicy if you want it spicy. So I will order things like lamb vindaloo, which is a kind of...
That sounds so good.
Yeah, it's a kind of tangy lamb, really thick lamb stew, made with garlic and wine and spices. Mm-hmm. And then I'll get like lamb vindaloo and put it over rice, which they'll also send you. And so that'll kind of be the meat course. And then I also will get flatbread, which is called naan. And I like to get flatbread that like has garlic and cilantro on the outside. Mm-hmm. And then I also get these things called pakora, which are fritters, and there are different kinds of pakora. They have ones that I really like that are vegetable pakora. So what they do is they take different vegetables and they put them in a batter and then they deep fry them. Oh. And you can eat them with mint sauce. So they'll send you the mint sauce as well. So I'll have like lamb stew and rice and flatbread and vegetable fritters.
Holy smokes!
And this is very tangy, spicy, aromatic food. It is not bland.
That sounds so good. But if someone had said to me, I'll give you 20 guesses what kind of food Jimmy eats on Christmas Eve, Himalayan would not have come up. I'd have gone 20. I would have gone 0 for 20.
What would have been your first guess?
Maybe Chinese or Japanese food. Mm-hmm. I guess there's a kind of back east. There's a kind of a Chinese food tradition among non-Christians especially Jewish people for Christmas. So I don't know. I guess
and anybody who is in the old days in America, if you needed to order food on Christmas, Chinese was often your best bet.
Yeah, everybody else was celebrating Christmas.
Exactly. All the other restaurants would be closed. So there is a kind of tradition of Chinese in some places. And that leads to Christmas movies.
Because, Christmas movies, yes.
Because you see the family in A Christmas Story go out for Chinese after the neighbors, Bumpus's dogs, destroy their own food. And so to have a nice Christmas dinner at the end of the movie, they go out for Chinese. And A Christmas Story is a good Christmas movie. Now, I don't have a favorite, but there are certain movies I will watch, at Christmas time. One of them is A Christmas Story, which is a classic. It's the one, if you don't remember, it's the one...
The BB gun.
The BB gun. Yeah.
Everybody remembers that.
Double action Red Ryder BB gun. You'll shoot your eye out. Yeah. So there's that one. That's very good. It's a Wonderful Life is another.
Yeah.
Santa Claus Conquers the Martians.
Of course, a classic.
Yeah, and I will in particular watch the Mystery Science Theater 3000 version of Santa Claus Conquers the Martians.
I have not seen it. Have you seen it, Darren?
It's a lot of fun.
No?
Yeah. There's also a Riff Tracks version of it. And then I also might watch... Now, I'm not actually a fan of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol.
You're not?
No, because it gets trotted out as, this is such a great Christmas story, and it has nothing to do with Christmas. I mean, it happens at Christmas time, but what I find is it's a kind of secular film or story that ends up distracting from the Christmas Jesus message, but people will tend to present it as if it's a moving spiritual thing in a way that's different than like Santa Claus Conquers the Martians, which is just fluff and fun and fantasy and is not meant to be serious.
You don't cry at the end of that every time?
And Santa Claus Conquers, It's a Wonderful Life maybe, but not Santa Claus Conquers the Martians.
Okay.
It has a very happy ending.
Yeah.
But in any event, I'm not a huge fan of A Christmas Carol.
How interesting.
Someday I need to read the original novel just to see if it's different than the movies and how.
Do you know
it's
C.S.
presented.
Lewis agreed with you? He didn't like Christmas Carol, although
I didn't know that.
I don't even know why I know this. G.K. Chesterton defended it, and C.S. Lewis said it's very similar to what you're saying. It's not. It's not really Christmas.
Yeah, but I acknowledge the story is a good story.
Yeah,
it's just not about the real meaning of Christmas.
Yeah,
and this is what I find annoying about presentations of A Christmas Carol is it gets presented as this is the real meaning of Christmas. No, it is not.
No,
this is Scrooge having redemption, and that's great that Scrooge has redemption.
Yeah.
But learning to love other people is not the real meaning of Christmas, and that's a counterfeit Christmas.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
But it still can be a good story, and you can even tell it at Christmas time. You just need to make it about time travel instead, because it's the classic time travel story. And so you've got the Ghost of Christmas Past, the Ghost of Christmas Present, the Ghost of Christmas Future, and that makes the Doctor Who A Christmas Carol Christmas special
I should have known
the
this.
best telling of A Christmas Carol that I have ever seen, and it's the best of the Doctor Who Christmas specials where they use time travel to bring about the effects of the three ghosts. And it is a story of redemption, and it's very moving, and it's very funny, and you don't see a lot of shows that involve time travel and flying around in the sky in a sleigh on Christmas Day being pulled by a gigantic flying shark.
You just don't see that in a lot of them.
Not a lot of them. So I will sometimes watch that one, even if it's not Christmas. And also the Doctor Who Christmas special, The Return of Dr. Mysterio, is pretty good.
That's a Christmas special.
It's a Christmas special.
Right.
It's set at Christmas. It's a superhero story, but it's set at Christmas.
Marianne, you brought just as much happiness as I thought you would bring by asking that question. Learning about the Himalayan food and the Doctor Who Dickens Christmas story couldn't have gone better, Marianne. Thanks for asking that. Next one comes from Robert. He says, in It's a Wonderful Life, the aforementioned movie, It's a Wonderful Life, George Bailey is given a glimpse of how things would be if he had never been born. Clearly, he was transported to another reality in the multiverse. Unless there are only two realities in the multiverse, Clarence the Angel must have chosen to show the most unfavorable version of events in the infinite realities where George was never born, suggesting angels are capable of viewing infinite realities. If instead Clarence erroneously showed George a more positive reality, would it be immoral for him to try to escape Clarence so he could stay there rather than go back to his own universe? Holy smokes!
So I don't think that I would agree that, well, number one, I don't think angels can view infinite realities. I think Clarence was getting heavenly help in whatever realities he had access to. But I also don't think that he would have shown him the worst. I think that the logic of the movie is that George Bailey is shown what would have happened if he had not been born. And that's the only variable that changes, is just George Bailey is never born. And everything else plays out the way it would have with that one change. So there would be timelines where it goes even worse because there's more than one change. Not only is George Bailey not born, but Hitler wins the war.
Yeah.
Or something like that. Or a plague wipes out all of mankind.
I got you.
So there can be even worse ones, but they involve more variables. And the logic of the drama is that this is the only variable that's changed. And you could then, and philosophically this would be interesting, you'd analyze this in contemporary philosophy under possible worlds discourse. And since Clarence is getting help from heaven, one thing that a lot of philosophers would immediately think in terms of is middle knowledge, where God would have knowledge of what people would have done in certain circumstances. And so this would be could be based on a kind of middle knowledge view of God knows how this reality would have unfolded if George Bailey had never been born. What would people have done freely in that situation? And now, I'm not personally a huge fan of middle knowledge, but it would lend itself to that kind of analysis. In terms of if Clarence made a mistake and took George to a happier, better reality, would it have been immoral for George to stay there? Well, I don't think that number one, Clarence could easily take George somewhere wrong because he's portrayed as a bumbling angel. And by the way, he's also a human, and do not trust It's a Wonderful Life for your angelology.
Right.
Humans and
Thomas
angels
Aquinas
are
would not.
two different species. So suppose he takes him to a better place. Well, if I take you to a better place, Psychelet, are you obliged to go back to where I took you from?
I don't believe I am. No, I don't believe I am. No.
Not always.
No, right.
What if it meant abandoning your family?
Well, yes. Okay, so that's right. There are cases in which I would be obliged.
Yeah.
And in reality, I do have a family, and I have obligations to them. So, yes, I have to go back to them.
Okay, so I would argue the same essential thing. Yeah. I don't think if George had no obligations, to help Zuzu and everybody else, then I don't think it would be wrong for him to stay in a better reality. But in fact, he does have obligations to people in his own original timeline, and in order to meet those obligations, he needs to go back to his original timeline. So I would say, given his obligations, he should go back morally.
Yeah. All right. But I mean, not to bicker with Robert, but it sometimes it seems like we present the possibility that we can think of as obviously it's this, but it's not obviously that there's a multiverse involved in this. It could just be Clarence giving him a vision,
or a holodeck.
A holodeck. I didn't even think. Yes. Do angels have holodecks? That's the title of your next book. Just gave it to you, Jimmy. There you go.
We'll see.
That's a free one. You can have it.
Okay.
If the Magi, this comes from Gordon, and I think we have time.
Yeah, we do.
If the Magi had seen the star in the east, why did they go west?
Well, so Matthew does say that they saw the star in the east, and exactly what that means has been debated. It could mean they see the star over the eastern horizon from where they are in the east. It could also mean that, and this has been proposed, that when it says they saw it rise in the east, it means they saw its heliacal rising, which we mentioned earlier in the hour, which is where a star rises briefly over the eastern horizon in conjunction with the sun. It happens once a year, and it may mean we saw the star's heliacal rising.
Okay.
It also could mean that they saw it when they were in the east.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I didn't think about that.
In which case, but I think that they saw it rise over the eastern horizon. The reason they went west is because the star signified that there is a newborn king in Judea.
Right.
And Judea was in the west. So if you want to visit the newborn king, you got to go west, old man. And so people often have this idea they were being led by the star.
Right.
No. They were not being led by the star. That is a misreading of the text. At a certain point in their journey, they saw the star in front of them on their way to Bethlehem, but it did not lead them from the east to the west. That's why they went to the palace in Jerusalem, is because they knew, okay, newborn Judean king, that's what the star told them. So they went to the palace where you'd expect to find a king. They were not being led around by the nose by the star.
I can't believe an hour already gone, but we have another hour of Christmas questions. It's an open forum entirely devoted to Christmas questions from the internet for Jimmy Akin, our guest. We're going to continue with that when we come back right after this, right here on Catholic Answers Live. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. All warm and cozy in our studio, raining outside, feeling very wintry. That's wintry here if it's raining. Mm-hmm. We don't do winter any better than that. And so we're doing a little bit of Christmas open forum with Jimmy Akin, senior apologist here at Catholic Answers. Thank you for returning for a second hour, Jimmy.
Oh, my pleasure.
Lots more Christmas questions for you.
Indeed.
Internet Christmas open forum. The next one comes from Jerry. I just heard, wait, am I in the right one? Yeah.
Yeah.
Jerry, I just heard a lady on a radio show. No need to be more specific, Jerry. Thank you.
And he wasn't.
No. Say that when she went to catechism as a little girl, they were told that Joseph and Mary were cousins. I was like, what? That's what he wrote.
So this is not at all unreasonable. We know that they were both from Nazareth, and people who grew up in villages tended to marry other villagers, and over time, people in villages would become related to each other, not necessarily as first cousins, mm-hmm. but in more distant cousin relationships. And in fact, the idea that you shouldn't marry your cousin is very modern. Mm-hmm. This cousin marriage, even first cousin marriage, has been actually quite common historically. Now, you will hear people say, well, you shouldn't marry your first cousin because there could be genetic abnormalities and your child could have birth defects. And there's actually been studies of how much does it increase the chance of your child having birth defects. Between 1% and 2%. It is very, very, very minor of an effect. Now, if you do it generation after generation, like European royalty, you can get hemophilia being passed down or something within tightly, narrowed circles. But just marrying a first cousin is there's already like a 3 to 4% chance of a birth abnormality, and marrying a cousin increases it by between 1% and 2%.
Yeah.
So this fear is overblown.
Yeah.
And as a result, people in the ancient world who didn't know anything about genetics, well, they knew when their kids had birth defects, and they didn't see them happening when they married cousins. So they married cousins. And there were various reasons for this. Travel was one of them. If people live in the same place, you're going to end up intermarrying.
Sure.
If you're not traveling around, because airplanes, trains, and automobiles haven't been invented yet, and society is not highly mobile. Also, this was a way of keeping resources and things like that within the family. Mm-hmm. So the family was stronger as a whole, and it was very common until like the last 100 to 200 years for people, even in the West, to marry either first cousins or second cousins or something like that. And so it's not at all unreasonable to suppose that Joseph and Mary and everybody else living in Nazareth, which was a very tiny village, were related to each other in one way or another. So cousin hypothesis, while we can't prove it, it is not at all unreasonable.
So both came from Nazareth. Nazareth, not a teeming metropolis.
No, not even today, but it would have been even smaller back then.
Just a tiny place.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Jerry. Appreciate the question. This one comes from Mandy. Do we know when the celebration of Christmas began in the church? What did it look like initially? How did it develop historically? How did we get to the cultural celebrations related to Christmas that we experience in modern times?
So originally, we don't have any evidence of Christians celebrating Christmas. And in fact, there was we do have some evidence that various groups of Christians looked kind of askance at Christmas, or at the idea of celebrating birthdays in general. You don't find a lot of birthdays in Scripture. There's only 2 people who celebrate birthdays in Scripture. One of them is Pharaoh, and one of them is Herod, who ends up putting John the Baptist to death. And so these are both viewed as negative figures, as bad guys. And ordinary people frequently didn't even remember when they were born, because why bother? I'm illiterate.
Yeah.
You know, it's not relevant to my life to know exactly what day I was born on. We're not big into record keeping here in the village full of illiterates. And so lots of people have no idea. I mean, they may remember if you happen to be, oh, yeah, he was born on Passover. Well, you might remember that. Or he was born in the spring.
Yeah.
But exactly what year, I'm kind of fuzzy on. And this is very common even today in a lot of societies that don't have the level of record keeping and numeracy that we do here in America. And so so a lot of it tended to be, well, so you know who did keep records in ancient society?
Those Romans.
The rich people.
Oh, yeah.
And the royal people who had to run an administrative state.
Yeah.
And so what you find is the rich royal people in the ancient world celebrated birthdays, but at least they did more than ordinary people. And because there's always class resentment, ordinary people looked at those rich people having fabulous feasts and getting drunk and doing immoral stuff on their birthdays, and partly envied it, but also resented it.
Sure.
And so this led to a culture where ordinary people, even in the church initially, didn't like birthday celebrations. And so and we have early evidence of that, like at the end of the 2nd century and the beginning of the 3rd century, of Christians saying real Christians don't celebrate birthdays.
Yeah.
Now, this was a matter of culture, and our culture is different, and that's fine. But the fact that you had this anti-birthday sentiment in many Christian circles meant that a lot of Christians early on did not celebrate anybody's birthday, including Christ. It wasn't considered holy. Instead, what you wanted to celebrate as someone's birthday was their death day, because that's the day they're born into the next life in heaven. And so so you would find that as an equivalent for birthday celebrations. And thus, the celebration of Jesus' death began immediately, his death and resurrection. That's Easter and Good Friday. I mean, those go all the way back to the 1st century. But you did have some church fathers discussing days on which they believed Christ was born, even though they didn't celebrate it. So it seems that there was a discussion of his birth and when it occurred that developed, at least from what the evidence suggests, before they began a liturgical celebration. And so when did the first liturgical celebration of Christmas happen? Well, there's a document known as the Chronography of 354, which is a document dealing with liturgical timetables and stuff that was written in the year 354. And it records that, I guess, 18 years previously, in 336, that there had been a celebration of Christ's birth on December 25th in Rome. And so that would seem to be the first recorded December 25th celebration of Christ's birth. It was a local one in Rome in 336. In terms of what it looked like, probably the only way it differed from a normal celebration of Mass, because they didn't have elaborate Christmas decorations and stuff, was just they mentioned Christ's birth in the prayers of the Mass on that day. That was probably it. And then over the course of time, additional customs developed. They varied from place to place. And so you would have different Christmas customs in one area compared to another area. And from one time to another time. So there's been a lot of variation. In terms of when our modern Christmas iconography developed, that, at least here, the iconography we have in the U.S. with the Santa Claus and the reindeer and all that stuff, that developed here in America. One of the key roles now, so St. Nicholas is the basis of Santa Claus. And you might wonder, how do you get Santa Claus from St. Nicholas? Well, okay, so New York was originally, early on, was settled by the Dutch. And so, like New York City was originally New Amsterdam. And so you had these Dutch settlers who came over, and in In Dutch, Saint Nicholas is Sinterklaas. And St. Nicholas gave us Sinterklaas in Dutch, which gave us Santa Claus in English.
Oh, okay.
And the updated St. Nicholas figure was then just like you see people, like drawing religious figures in terms of their own time because they don't know what ancient clothing looked like.
Sure, yeah.
And so that's what happened with St. Nicholas. People in New Amsterdam didn't know what a 4th century Turkish bishop dressed like. And they couldn't just go on Wikipedia and look it up. And so they envisioned St. Nicholas as a modern-looking Dutchman, and which is where you get, like if you're dressed for the winter, you got the fur-lined clothing, which you wouldn't necessarily need in Turkey, although you might. But this is where some of the iconography comes from. His suit is based on what people at the time used as winter wear, including the boots. It's where the pipe smoking comes from. It's the cap and all of that. That's a kind of Dutch-American makeover of St. Nicholas. And then in 1844, Clement Moore, a poet, published the very famous poem, Visit from St. Nicholas, which is the one that has the 8 tiny reindeer. And with the name, Dasher and Donner and Blitzen and all that stuff. And those, he's drawing on earlier traditions, but it was that poem, A Visit from St. Nicholas, that cemented a lot of the Santa Claus Christmas iconography in people's minds.
Right.
And then in the 1940s, I guess it was, I believe it was Macy's, for a marketing push, wanted to add the 9th reindeer, Rudolph.
Oh.
And they got, who was it? It was it Gene Autry who did the song, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer?
I think Burl Ives.
Well, it may have been more than one. Okay. But so we've had this growth of Christmas iconography over time, and it continues to happen. In 2005, we got the Elf on the Shelf, and we also got Krampus in the early 2000s, and so it just changes and evolves over time. By the way, in Japan, Santa Claus lives on the moon.
Thank you, Japan. That makes so much more sense.
Yeah.
Japanese are very
Helps
sensible.
with conquering the Martians, too.
I know. You got a little head start there. All right. Thank you very much, Mandy. That was very, very interesting. Somebody said to me the other day that the earliest celebrations of Christmas involved fasting. And I don't remember who said it. It was somebody on the show. You don't remember? I don't remember.
Yeah. Well, repeating unsubstantiated rumors is what we're all about here on Catholic Answers Live.
I guess so. I had the hope that you might fill that in for me, but no, I guess not.
I have no knowledge of that.
All right. Jason asks... No, Jason, you're going to have to wait. Hang on, Jason. Right back after this. More open forum of the Christmas variety right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
This is Bishop Chad Zielinski from the Diocese of Fairbanks of Northern Alaska, and you are listening to Catholic Answers Live.
Homeschool Connections, an online provider of courses for your Catholic homeschool, is a sponsor of Catholic Answers Live. Homeschool Connections website is homeschoolconnections.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
He was a 10th century saint, priest, mystic, and doctor of the Church, honored as the first poet of Armenia.
Matthew Bunsen and the Doctors of the Church.
Gregory of Narek is revered by Armenians as a watchful angel in human form. His masterwork, the Book of Lamentations, was intended to be his last testament, an encyclopedia of prayer for all nations. He was named a Doctor of the Church in 2015.
For more about the Doctors of the Church, visit doctorsofthechurch.com.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Merry Christmas to you. Hope it's going well this Christmas season for you. We've got Jimmy Akin here with us answering Christmas questions. These are all Christmas questions that came from the internet. Next one comes from Lauren. Lauren asks, wait, let me just make sure I'm on the right one. No, I said I was going to do Jason. Lauren, you got to wait. Before I went to the break, I said I was going to Jason's question. What is the likelihood that the famous cave in Bethlehem is the true site of Christ's birth?
So I haven't done a detailed study of the archaeology of the Bethlehem Grotto, but based on what knowledge I do have, I think there's a significant likelihood that it really is where Jesus was born. We have very early evidence that Jesus was born in a cave. That's information. It doesn't come to us from the Gospels, but it does come to us from the 2nd century, because in the 2nd century, the infancy Gospel of James was written, also known as the Proto-Evangelium of James, and it is explicit about the fact that Jesus was born in a cave. And there is local tradition that goes back to at least the 400s, the 300s, the 4th century, that this is the cave itself, because the current Basilica of the Nativity in Bethlehem, it was one of the holy sites that was visited by the Emperor Constantine's mother in the early 300s when she came and did her tour of the Holy Land. And so I know the tradition that this was the cave was there in the early 300s. We have explicit testimony that it wasn't a cave in the mid-100s, so that's not a big gap. And there may be additional indicators as well, but I'd have to do further study to determine that.
All right. Jason, thank you very, very much for the question. By the way, I looked it up, and you were right. Jean Autry was first. Burl Lives recorded after Jean Autry.
Yeah, Burl Lives would have done it perhaps for the Rankin Bass animated special.
Yeah. This one comes from Lauren. Here's something I see asked in Catholic women's groups. Given that we now understand virginity as more than physical integrity, how do we understand Mary's virginity during the act of the birth of Christ? The Church Fathers have some things to say about this from their historical perspective, but why is this important, if it is, for us today?
So the Church teaches that Mary remained a virgin throughout her entire life. And so this means that she was a virgin before her act of giving birth, before her parturition. So she was a virgin ante parte, and then she was a virgin in parte in the act of giving birth, and she was a virgin postpartum after giving birth. And what that means physically is something that has been subject to different interpretations over the course of time. Today, we tend to think of virginity as meaning has not had sex with a person. You know, someone's a virgin if they have not had sex. But historically, there has also been an understanding of virginal integrity that goes beyond that and involves the preservation of a particular membrane, and that is often ruptured when a child is born. And so so you have in older sources this broader understanding of what it means to preserve one's virginal integrity. And in terms of what the Church teaches, there is a diversity of opinion about how the Church's teaching that Mary preserved her virginity through her entire life is to be understood. There are recent figures who have said, well, you got to stick with the old understanding. But there have also been recent figures, theologians, who have said, no, as long as Mary never had relations with anybody, that would be sufficient. And so we wouldn't need to propose a miraculous birth for Jesus. And to the modern mind, it could even be like, why would you even want to bother proposing that? Well, it did get proposed, and it got proposed astonishingly early. The idea that Jesus had a miraculous birth is found in the Ascension of Isaiah, which is a first century Christian writing that appears to date from the year 67.
That is very early. That's during the writing of the New Testament.
It's during the writing of the New Testament. It's before the writing of the book of Revelation. And so you had first century Christians reporting that Jesus had a miraculous birth where he basically, there was a big, in the version in the Ascension of Isaiah is there's a big light and all of a sudden Jesus as a baby is there and Mary is no longer pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is a very, very early tradition, and as a result, even though I understand the modern sensibility of, why would you want to suppose this, we do actually have some very early evidence for it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not canonical, it's not guaranteed to be true, but it is, this is not an inspired document, but it is very early, and so I have to take that seriously. Now, in terms of why would this matter, it's essentially a subcase of why does Jesus have a virgin birth at all?
Yes. Okay.
Because if Mary remains a virgin for her whole life, well, okay, she never had relations with anybody. Why is it important that Jesus have a virginal conception? Well, it's to prove that he's the Son of God. Now, God could have sent his son into the world in another way. He could have had a human father, sire Jesus. That's how he could have gotten the genetic material for half of Jesus's personal genome through a human father. That's totally possible. God could have done that, but he chose not to. And the apparent reason why God chose not to is to underscore the fact, this is my son.
Yeah.
In a distinct and unique way that does not apply to anybody else.
Right.
And so if that's the reason for the virginal conception in the first place, that would seem to be the reason for, or the significance for the preservation of Mary's virginity throughout her life. Because if she later has ordinary children and through the ordinary means, then you can always, there'll be a doubt of, did she and Joseph or someone else maybe get together early on? And by having her virginity preserved throughout her life, it makes the point that, you can choose not to believe it, but it makes the point, if you are a believer, no, this Jesus is totally unique as the Son of God, and that's why God chose to do it this way.
Lauren, thank you very, very much for that question. Appreciate it. It's an internet Christmas open forum. Jimmy Akin is our guest. Patrick asks this. Here's a nice short question. How little was O Little Town of Bethlehem?
So we know that in the ancient world it was quite small. Micah 5:2 says it was the smallest of the families of Judah, although that could be hyperbole. It might not have been the literal smallest. Today there are about 30,000 people living in Bethlehem, but the best estimate of its size in the first century that I'm aware of was proposed by the archaeologist and New Testament scholar William F. Albright. And based on the research he did, Albright concluded that in the first century, Bethlehem it was 100 times smaller than it is today, that it only had 300 people living there.
Okay.
And he further then said, okay, so how many, given that, if there were 300 people there, how many of those would have been killed in the slaughter of the innocents? How many boys would have been 2 years old or younger at the time? And he estimated it would have been 6 or 7. So we shouldn't imagine the slaughter of the innocent as this massive thing. Sometimes you hear people say, well, why isn't it in the records? Well, one, because we don't have a record of most things that happened.
Yeah, right.
But if it involved 6 or 7 boys,
right,
you wouldn't expect a record of it. It would have been very distressing if you're one of the parents of those kids,
right,
and to the people in Bethlehem, but it's not the kind of thing that you would expect a big court write-up to be written up and preserved in Herod's archives, which we don't have anyway.
All right, Patrick, thank you very, very much for that question.
So Herod killed lots of people, 6 or 7 little kids. That's a very tiny fraction of the deaths Herod was responsible for.
Among the people he killed, lots of his own relatives, including his own children.
Yes, and one of his wives and things like that. There's a statement attributed and I don't know, this is probably apocryphal, but in the ancient Roman literature, there's a statement attributed to the Emperor Augustus of saying it would be better to be Herod's pig than to be Herod's son.
And it would.
And the joke is because Herod's a Jew, he's not going to kill his pig to eat it, but he does kill his sons, and more than one of them.
He did indeed, yeah. More on Christmas coming up right after this. All of our questions from the internet. The internet has questions about Christmas. Jimmy Akin's got answers. We'll have more of those answers on Catholic Answers Live as we continue with our Internet Christmas Open Forum.
Have you enrolled in the Catholic Answers School of Apologetics? Let me ask you a more important question. Do you believe as a Catholic that you have an obligation to share the Catholic faith? In fact, the Church has answered this question, and the answer is that all confirmed Catholics are obliged to share the faith. It's actually in canon law. Catholic Answers is here to help you fulfill that obligation. Our School of Apologetics courses will equip you to help all the people you come in contact with understand what the Church teaches and why. A great place to start is with all the Catholics in your life. Learn the art of apologetics from the best of the best and start sharing the gospel today. Visit schoolofapologetics.com. That's schoolofapologetics.com.
Did you know you can access Catholic Answers Live right from your phone or other mobile device? Download the Catholic Answers Live app today. It's free, and you'll have instant access to our daily broadcast, the schedule of upcoming shows, and you'll even be able to search the archive and listen to thousands of past shows. The Catholic Answers Live app, available now on iOS and Android.
Most of us Catholic parents agree our number one goal in life is to pass on the faith to our children. But here's the bad news. Today's world has a million ways to steal your kid's soul. Don't be afraid, says Father Sebastian Walsh. God loves your children even more than you do, and He desires their salvation more than anything. In his groundbreaking new book, Always a Catholic, Father Walsh shows you how to cooperate with God to bring about the fulfillment of His will for your kids. Always a Catholic reminds us that keeping our kids in the faith is about the way we live our Catholicism in our own lives and as a family from day to day. Order your copy of Always a Catholic by visiting shop.catholic.com today or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
This is Debbie Georgiani.
And I'm Jerry Usher.
Join us for Take Two with Jerry and Debbie tomorrow at noon Eastern.
Now back to Catholic Answers Live.
Merry Christmas and welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. Jimmy Akin, our guest, and we're taking all the questions from the internet today. And they're all related to Christmas. They're all Christmas questions of one kind or another for Jimmy. And this one comes from Christopher, Jimmy. Mm-hmm. How long after the birth of Jesus did the Magi arrive? Based on Herod's slaughter of those boys up to 2 years old, it could have been up to 2 years, right? Certainly not 12 days.
Correct. And so what Matthew tells us is that Herod slaughtered all the baby boys in Bethlehem that were 2 years old and under, in keeping with the time that he learned from the Magi. Mm-hmm. And so this is up to 2 years later. Now the question is it a full 2 years later? And I think that the answer is no, for a couple of reasons. One, if the Magi had told Herod that the baby was born exactly 2 years ago, then he wouldn't need to kill all of the ones that were less than a year old.
Oh, right. He killed everybody up to 2.
Everybody up to 2. And that indicates some ambiguity about exactly how old Jesus was in Herod's mind. So they gave him a chronological indicator, but it didn't tell Herod the exact, or didn't convince Herod of the exact age of the baby Jesus, because then he could have just gone and, okay, where's the 24-month-old?
Yeah,
you know? And so this suggests that Herod is being cautious, since he's not going for a specific age, but for an age range. That suggests he's being cautious to try to make sure he gets the up and comer, and that would suggest that the true answer is somewhere in the middle from Herod's perspective, and he's padding on both sides of the age he thinks Jesus really is.
Mm-hmm.
So he's giving himself margin for error.
Yeah.
And since 2 and under is the range, that would suggest, now if I was Herod, I would say, I mean, number one, I wouldn't be killing babies, but
good job, Jimmy.
If I were, if I was Herod, I would say, okay, I think he's about a year old, so I'm going to kill everybody 12 months on either side of that, just to make sure I get him.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that it was not a full 2 years. I think it was more likely a year. And I have a second reason for saying that. It could have been a little more than a year, but I think it probably was not a full 2 years, because the evidence we have from the church fathers and from the Gospel of Luke is that Jesus was born in the 28th year of Augustus Caesar, as reckoned from the Battle of Actium. Actium was a sea battle off the coast of Greece in which Augustus defeated the forces of Mark Antony and Cleopatra.
Mm-hmm.
And this allowed him to consolidate the power in Rome in a single person, himself. Because previously, like Mark Antony and Augustus and another guy had been members of the triumvirate. But after Actium, all the power got concentrated in him.
Yeah.
And so it was common to use Actium as one of the dates to count as the beginning of his reign. So according to the church fathers, Christ was born in the 28th year of Augustus from Actium, and that would mean that Christ was born either in the second half of the year 3 BC or the first half of the year 2 BC.
Okay.
Because the 28th year of Augustus straddled our year. Then when did Herod die? Well, you'll often hear that Herod died in 4 BC. This is nonsense. Herod did not die in 4 BC. The actual evidence is that Herod, and there have been various scholars pointing this out recently, the actual evidence is that Herod died in the first half of 1 BC. So if Jesus is born in the latter half of 3 or the first half of 2, and you go forward a year, that's the latter half of 2 or the first half of 1. And the first half of 1 is when the evidence says that Herod actually died, because he died in conjunction with an eclipse.
Okay, so you have a good
eclipse.
dating of it.
Yeah. And so if Herod died in the first half of 1 and Jesus was born in the 28th year of Augustus, it's like a year to a year and a half at most after Jesus' birth. So I think that's additional evidence that Herod was padding from when the wise men arrived.
I got to say, this makes Herod even a bigger jerk. He's not going to be around for the baby to grow up even.
No, yeah.
Like
he was already dying.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I don't mean to call people jerks. I really don't. But I'm not in favor of this Herod guy at all. I now have very distinct negative feelings about him. It's our Christmas open forum. All the questions coming from the internet. This one's from...
To give a little bit more Herod charitability, perhaps.
Yeah.
Even if he didn't see the child grow up, he might survive long enough for the child to become the focus of a rebellion.
Oh, I see.
Against him.
Yeah, right.
Because it's like, hey, if this is the rightful king of the Jews, let's knock over that Herod guy, and we'll just have this guy on the throne as a baby and put in a regent to manage things.
Oh, yeah, right. And out you go, Herod. Thanks for your service. It was not easy to be a king in that part of the world in those days.
Although it was easier when you had the might of the Roman state backing you up.
Yeah. I think Herod had to make a few trips to Rome to assure that, right? Because there was a couple of times he was like, I better go see Caesar.
Especially early on, yeah. That's how he became king, is he kind of was involved in some double dealing, but he ended up getting because he was a tricky guy, but he ended up getting the Roman Senate to endorse him as king.
The next one comes from Philip. Oh, and it's somewhat related. I'm curious about the timeline between the Holy Family's arrival in Bethlehem for the birth of Jesus and their departure and return from Egypt. How long were they in Bethlehem? How long were they in Egypt?
So that's why I wanted to do the previous question right before this one, because it establishes our basic timeline.
Okay.
So if Jesus is born in the second half of 3 or the first half of 2 BC, then and the wise men arrive a year or a year to a year and a half later, then it's possible that the Holy Family could have stayed in Bethlehem for that time. It's also possible that they could have gone back to Nazareth and come back to Bethlehem when the wise men arrived. Apparently, Joseph either had family in both places that he could stay with, or he had property in both places, maybe both. And so every year for the 3 pilgrimage festivals, which we know Mary and Joseph observed, they would come down from Nazareth and presumably stay in Bethlehem, because it's like 6 miles from Jerusalem.
Right.
And if they already had family or property there, it would make it a logical place for them to stay during the pilgrimage feasts. So either the Holy Family stayed in Bethlehem for that year to year and a half, or they left and came back, which they would have done anyway periodically. In terms of the flight to Egypt, well, we don't know exactly where in Egypt they went. There was a major colony of Jews in Alexandria. Now, Alexandria is up at the top of Egypt, on the Mediterranean coast. And if you visualize Egypt, you have the Nile River coming northward, and then it fans out into the Nile Delta. And on one side of the Nile Delta, you have Israel. And then you have Gaza and the Sinai Peninsula, and then you move over into Egypt, and you encounter one branch of the Nile Delta. Well, Alexandria is on the other side of the Nile Delta from that. So it's possible they went all the way to Alexandria to be in that Jewish community. It's also possible they went elsewhere, because there were groups of Jews elsewhere in Egypt. In fact, there was even a Jewish temple that was located in Egypt, in Leontopolis, if I recall correctly. Either that or Heliopolis, but I believe it was Leontopolis. But in any event, Alexandria would be a good spot to go. And it wouldn't be that hard to reach. It's only about 360 miles from Bethlehem. So if you're Joseph and you're in Bethlehem and you get this warning, don't get out of Dodge, it's 360 miles to get to Alexandria. If you walked or ride 20 miles a day, you'll be there in 18 days. On the other hand, they may not have gone that far. It's possible they would have been on the near side of the Nile Delta. That's just 200 miles away, so it would be 10 days to get there. So they go there, and then because we have this evidence that if it was like a year to a year and a half later, we're already in the first half of 1 BC, which is when Herod dies. So the odds are they did not stay in Egypt that long. They got over there. They got word that Herod had died. The angel appears and says, you can go back. Everyone who's trying to kill the child is gone. And then they came back. Joseph learns that Archelaus, Herod's son, has been appointed to rule in Judea. So he says, let's not go to the family in Bethlehem. Let's head back up to north to Nazareth.
Fascinating. Philip, thank you. As a matter of fact, Christopher and Philip both, thank you for those questions. It's an open forum all about Christmas. All of our questions have come from the internet. We got a bunch more. We'll do those right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
Hello, this is Archbishop Alexander Sample of the Archdiocese of Portland in Oregon. Keep that dial right here on Catholic Answers Live.
St. John Paul II stated that, for the disciple of Christ, evangelization is a duty, an obligation of love. And the Catechism of the Catholic Church states that evangelization is necessary for salvation.
So we know we're called, but how do we do it?
St. Paul Street Evangelization can help. To learn more, contact us at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
One of the reasons we should go to Mass is because it is the food of the saints that we receive.
And for the saints, they understood rightly that the time after Holy Communion, that those moments are the most precious moments of our lives.
The Holy Sacrifice of the Mass, live from the EWTN Chapel, every morning, 8 Eastern, on EWTN Radio and Television.
Welcome back. Merry Christmas. Catholic Answers Live here. Jimmy Akin in studio with us, taking questions from the internet all about Christmas. We've covered a lot of good Christmas questions. People have a lot of Christmas questions.
They do.
I wasn't sure that we would have this many, but there's a lot of Christmas
and this
questions.
is even skimming out the duplicates and all the jokey non-questions that people put in the feed when they think they're being funny, but it takes my time to read them and cut them out.
Talking to you, Internet. Let's go to John's question. It's not really even a question. It's just a statement about John, but I assume he means it as a question. John says, I'm curious about the star that led the wise men.
Well, so am I, and so are a lot of other people. There's been a lot of discussion of what the star could have been, and unfortunately, it is difficult to say with certainty, and for a couple of reasons, at least a couple of reasons. One of them is in order to know there are a bunch of things the star could have been, but you need to know in order to establish which it was, you need to know two things which are very hard to know. The first one is exactly when Jesus was born. And because if you're proposing, if he's born in 3 BC or 2 BC, and you're saying, oh, well, Herod died in 4 BC, so Jesus must have been born in 6 or 7 BC.
Oh, right. Then
you're looking in the wrong set of years
Yeah.
for what the star could have been. And this is a big problem in studies of the Star of Bethlehem because lots of people are using the wrong date for Jesus' birth. There's a very famous horoscope. There's this guy, I'm blanking on his name, but there's this guy who has done a lot of work and very good work in horoscopes for historical individuals like Augustus. It turns out if you look at Augustus's natal horoscope, his birth horoscope, it just screams world ruler.
Oh, it does?
At you. Yeah.
How interesting.
And given the Greco-Roman way of interpreting astrology.
Right.
And,
so just to be clear, there would have been different horoscopes locally. Like so the way the Romans understood the stars.
Correct.
Different than, say, the Babylonians or the Sumerians.
Correct.
Okay.
So, and I'm about to get to that.
Okay.
So under the Greco-Roman system, Augustus has this amazing horoscope that would scream world ruler at you, and which is one of the reasons that Augustus was kind of private about some of this information. Especially early on. But so there's this guy who's done all this scholarly work on like horoscopes in this period and what they would have meant to people. Problem number one, he's using the wrong birthday for Jesus.
Okay.
So he's got an amazing horoscope for Jesus,
but it's not when Jesus was born.
It's in the wrong year.
Yeah.
And so so that's one problem with his analysis. The other problem with his analysis is he's relying on Greco-Roman astrology.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Well, there's more than one system of astrology in this part of the world. And so, Cy Kellett, with your knowledge of geography,
yes,
you think about Israel.
Yes.
Are Greece and Rome to the west or the east of Israel?
They are to the west.
Correct. Were the wise men from the west or the east of Israel?
They are from the east.
So you would not expect them to be using the Greco-Roman system of astrology, which is the other problem with this guy's horoscope for Jesus.
Yeah.
You would expect them to be using one of the Eastern systems of astrology. Now, the one that we know the most about is the Babylonian.
Okay.
Because the Babylonians not only wrote a lot, they wrote on clay tablets. And clay tablets survive well. In fact, when we have a problem in the West, they would write on papyrus and parchment and stuff, and your house burns down, your library goes up with it.
Yeah.
Well, in the East, you got all your clay tablets, and your library burns down, and the clay tablets get hardened and survive better.
Yeah, right.
So,
plus they're under a protective pile of rubble.
Yeah, and ash and stuff.
Right.
So we have all of these clay tablets from Mesopotamia, and we understand the Sumerian and Babylonian systems of astrology quite well. And there have recently been some attempts to analyze the Star of Bethlehem in those terms and say, well, what kind of signal? Now, unfortunately, there are other groups like the Nabateans. We don't know as much about their system. But for the Babylonian system, we do. And there have been recent attempts to analyze the Star of Bethlehem and say, what would have told Babylonian Magi that a king had been born in Judea and that you might want to go visit him? And there is an answer to that question. It involves the planet Jupiter, which was the king star. It's because it's the biggest planet.
Yeah.
It's the king star. I mean, we know that a little better now than they did then, but it was understood as the star representing the king. And it actually has a very interesting role in Babylonian astrology. Jupiter was very closely linked to the king. In fact, there are if Jupiter behaves a certain way in the sky, it's a sign that the king is going to die. And so they had, I think I may have told you this before.
Now I'm remembering. Yeah. I love this system.
The Babylonians had a system for dealing with it. If Jupiter behaves the way in the sky that indicates the king is going to die, how do you deal with it? Because you don't want the real king. The real king does not want to die.
No.
So what you do is you take a condemned prisoner who's going to die anyway, and you make him like king for a month. And you've got the real king dressing like a farmer, and he's putting on farmer clothing, and everyone's talking about the real king as if he's
not
a farmer.
The king. Totally not the king.
Totally not the king.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, it's this other guy over here is the king.
Right.
And then at the end of the month, you put him to death.
Yeah. And
that takes care of that. Jupiter said the king was going to die. The technical king died, and now the other king gets to resume his reign. So this is the substitute king system.
Yeah.
Well, there was a constellation. I want to say it's Aries, but there was a constellation in Babylonian astrology that was associated with Judea. It was like, this is the constellation for the West and for Judea in particular. And so if you have this king thing in the sky happening involving Jupiter, happening with the right constellation to signal you need to go west, and it's like to Judea, that would tell you Judean king has been born. And there's another sign in conjunction with this in Babylonian astrology that would indicate like a major king is going to be born that's going to affect the destiny of Mesopotamia. So maybe you want to send a friendship delegation there first to make peace with him so that it goes well for you.
Yeah.
And so there are a number. We need to do a whole separate show, maybe a focus on this understanding of the Star of Bethlehem and to get the details. But there are indications in Babylonian astrology that would signal something like this and motivate the Magi to go over there.
Fascinating. Thanks very much. I forget now who that was from. John. Yeah, John, thank you for sharing that question. Christmas Open Forum, Joanne asks this. Is it true that the temple lambs were wrapped in swaddling clothes to keep them perfect for sacrifice? I heard that recently as an explanation why the angel's message to the shepherds was a sign that Jesus was the Lamb of God who would be sacrificed for us.
So number one, I've never heard this claim.
Okay.
And I'm very doubtful of it. Because for one thing, we know that they weren't always, because if you go to like some of the last of the 12 prophets in the Old Testament, like Malachi definitely, I think maybe in Haggai as well, God is complaining about the inferior quality of the sacrifices, and saying, look, you wouldn't give this as a gift to your governor
Yeah.
Why are you giving this blind, lame animal to me?
Right.
And so obviously they were not always taking great care.
Here, God, you have this one.
Yeah. The blind and lame one that I can't sell.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
So certainly they didn't always take this kind of care. Also, this is just such a cute, touching little story. It's like too good to be true.
Mm.
And it doesn't fit with the purpose, with the text in Luke. When the angels appear to the shepherds, they say, go over to Bethlehem. You're going to find this child in swaddling clothes lying in a manger, and this will be a sign for you. Okay. Psychelet,
Yes,
if
sir.
someone told you
Yeah.
that if you go to a certain location, you're going to find a baby in a diaper lying in a manger,
Yeah.
what's the sign for you? The fact it's wearing a diaper
Or the
the
manger?
fact that it's in a manger?
Yeah, that might stand out a little bit more.
Yeah, because diapers are normal baby wear
Right.
in our society. Well, swaddling clothes were normal baby wear in their society. So if you're told, go and find this baby,
Yeah.
you're going to expect it to be swaddled.
Right.
The fact it's in a manger is what you're not going to expect. And so structurally in the text in Luke, or exegetically in the text in Luke, it's the fact the baby is lying in a manger that's the sign, not the fact that it's in swaddling clothes. And that would suggest that, lambs were also swaddled to keep them perfect. It's like, this doesn't ring true.
Yeah.
This sounds like a pious little legend that someone has thought of, but it does not ring true. And it would not have been the fact it's in swaddling clothes that was a sign for the shepherds.
Right, like all the other babies. No
Yeah.
swaddling clothes for them. We're laying them all in mangers all over the place, but no swaddling. No, that's not it. Joanne has another question, so I want to do that one too. Any idea how old Joseph was? Orthodox indicate he was much older than Mary, but Bishop Sheen and Father Calloway believe he was young. Would an old man likely make the trip to Egypt on foot easily?
Well, so in terms of how old Joseph was, the earliest evidence we have supports the view that is common in the East, that he was significantly older than Mary. In the infancy Gospel of James, which dates from the 2nd century, when Joseph is initially proposed to become Mary's guardian, he says, "I'm an old man." Unfortunately, he doesn't say how old.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I'd need to check. I assume the word in Greek there is presbyteros, but that can mean 40 and up.
Yeah.
Given the mortalities, pattern of the day, and so I don't know that he was that old. I mean, he was older than Mary, but if he was 45 or 50 or 55, you can go on long trips. And you're maybe not making them as fast as if you were an 18-year-old who wants to run.
Right, yeah.
But you have no problem. In fact, they would do these caravans as a village from Nazareth down to Jerusalem 3 times a year. That's a 100-mile trip.
Yeah.
And so whatever age Joseph was, he didn't have problems doing 100-mile trips. And in an emergency circumstance where they're going to kill your foster son.
Yeah.
Well, the question was, could he have made the trip to Egypt on foot easily? Well, maybe not easily, but this is an emergency.
Yeah.
And you're going to do what you need to do to get there. Also, according to the Eastern view and the Proto-Evangelium, or the Infancy Gospel of James, he had adult sons that would have helped them get there. And they would have traveled as a family, and so it wouldn't have just all fallen to Joseph. So I don't see this as being a decisive objection, the trip to Egypt, any more than, and for a variety of reasons, I tend to favor the older view of Joseph on evidential grounds.
Joanne, you ended us with 2 really good questions, but lots and lots of great Christmas questions. Thanks, everyone who gave us those Christmas questions. And thanks, Jimmy Akin, for coming in, answering a whole lot of Christmas questions.
My pleasure, and Merry Christmas.
And Merry Christmas to you, and enjoy, if you're going to watch it again,
Santa Claus Conquers the Martians?
Conquers the Martians, yeah.
Yeah.
Darren, thanks. Thanks, everybody in the booth. What's tomorrow, do we know? Let's do Catholic Answers live.
We'll find out.
Let's do a live show. Let's
A
do a
recorded live show.
pre-record. This is not going well. See you then, God willing. Catholic Answers Live.